first person who noticed something was wrong was the mailman. Every Tuesday morning in the small town of Ash Creek, Montana, people expected to see old Eleanor Whitmore sitting on her porch with a cup of black coffee and a faded red blanket across her knees. She was 80 years old, thin as paper, silver hair always pinned neatly behind her ears, the kind of woman who still mailed birthday cards instead of sending texts. But that Tuesday felt different. Eleanor wasn't drinking coffee. She was staring at an old photograph with trembling hands. The mailman, Greg, walked up the porch steps slowly. "You okay, Miss Eleanor?" She smiled weakly. "Greg, do you know how to use Facebook?" That question alone nearly made him laugh. Eleanor hated technology. She once called Wi-Fi invisible electricity, but that morning, her eyes looked desperate. "I need help finding someone." An hour later, Greg sat beside her at the kitchen table while she searched through a rusted biscuit tin filled with photographs, movie tickets, and yellowed letters tied with blue ribbon. Then she handed him a photo. A young man stood beside a motorcycle under the summer sun. Dark hair, sharp jawline, a crooked smile that looked impossible to forget. On the back of the picture were 4 words, "Forever yours, Joseph." Greg looked up. "Your husband?" Eleanor's expression softened. "No," she whispered. "My first love." Silence filled the kitchen. Greg carefully typed the post for her. "My name is Eleanor Whitmore. I'm 80 years old and living in Ash Creek, Montana. Before I leave this world, I'd like to find Joseph Bennett, the boy I loved in the summer of 1968. If anyone knows what happened to him, please tell him Eleanor is still waiting." He attached the photograph. Neither of them expected anything. But by sunset, the post exploded. Thousands of shares. People across Montana became obsessed with the story. Local news stations reposted it, radio hosts talked about it. Strangers cried in the comments, "Please let them reunite." This broke my heart. Find Joseph. For the first time in years, Eleanor smiled while reading replies. But 3 days later, someone commented something chilling. "That can't be Joseph Bennett. Joseph died in 1974. The internet froze. Within hours, more comments appeared. "My father knew him. He drowned near Blackwater River. There was a funeral." Someone even uploaded a photograph of an old gravestone. Joseph Arthur Bennett, 1949 to 1974. Eleanor stared at the screen for a very long time. Her hands began shaking. "That's impossible," she whispered. Greg frowned. "You sure?" She looked offended. "I would know if the man I loved died." But deep inside, fear had already begun crawling into her chest. Because Joseph disappeared suddenly in October of 1968. No goodbye. No explanation. Nothing. One day he simply vanished. And despite everything, she had never stopped believing he was alive. That night, Eleanor barely slept. Rain tapped softly against the windows while memories returned one by one. Joseph sneaking pebbles at her bedroom window, slow dancing beside jukebox music, his leather jacket smelling like gasoline and cedarwood. And the final night she ever saw him. He looked terrified. She remembered that now. Terrified. At 2:13 a.m., Eleanor walked into her attic searching for old boxes. Dust floated through the flashlight beam as thunder rolled outside. Then she found it. A small metal tin hidden beneath winter blankets. Inside were dozens of letters from Joseph, and one envelope she had never opened. Her name was written across the front in shaky handwriting. Eleanor, only if I disappear. Her breath caught. Slowly she opened it. Inside was a single page. "If you're reading this, it means they finally stopped looking for me. I'm sorry I left without saying goodbye. I didn't have a choice. If I stayed, they would have killed me too." Eleanor's blood turned cold. At the bottom was one sentence underlined twice. "Trust no one from Blackwater County." The next morning, Greg found Eleanor already dressed and waiting on the porch. "We're going to Blackwater." "Eleanor, now." Blackwater County sat 40 miles north of Ash Creek, an old mining town half-eaten by time. Boarded stores, rusted signs, empty streets. The kind of place where secrets survived longer than people. They stopped first at the cemetery. Joseph's grave sat beneath a dying pine tree. Eleanor approached slowly, her eyes locked on the stone. Then suddenly she froze. The date looked wrong. Not old wrong, fresh wrong. Greg crouched beside the grave. The engraving marks were cleaner than the surrounding stone, as if someone had altered it recently. Then Eleanor noticed something else. The dirt around the grave was soft, like it had been disturbed. A cold wind swept through the cemetery. Greg stood up carefully. I don't think Joseph's buried here. That's when they heard a voice behind them. You should leave. An old groundskeeper stood near the gate holding a shovel, his expression pale, nervous. Eleanor stepped forward. Did you know Joseph Bennett? The man's face changed instantly. Fear. Real fear. You people need to stop digging into this. What happened to him? The groundskeeper looked around before lowering his voice. Joseph Bennett never drowned. Eleanor's knees nearly buckled. He witnessed something back in '74. Something involving the sheriff's department and the mine owners. Next thing we knew, he disappeared. Greg frowned. But the funeral? The old man swallowed hard. Closed casket. Silence. Then he whispered. A week later, another body showed up in the river. Burned too badly to identify. They buried it under Joseph's name and told everyone the case was closed. Eleanor felt dizzy. For 52 years, Joseph might have been alive. But before she could speak, a black pickup truck appeared at the cemetery entrance. The groundskeeper's face drained of color. You need to go, he whispered urgently, right now. The truck door opened. A tall, elderly man stepped out wearing a dark coat and gray cowboy hat. He moved slowly, calmly, but the moment Eleanor saw his face, the world stopped. The eyes, those impossible blue eyes. She covered her mouth. No. The man stared at her silently, older, weathered, but not 80, not even close, maybe 60, maybe less. Greg looked between them in confusion. Eleanor stepped forward with tears flooding her eyes. Joseph? The man's expression cracked. For the first time in decades, emotion surfaced. Her knees gave out before he caught her, and suddenly she was crying like a teenage girl again, punching his chest weakly. You left me. Joseph held her carefully. I know. For 50 years. I know. Greg stood frozen nearby. None of this made sense. Not the grave, not his age, nothing. Finally, Eleanor pulled back. You didn't age. Joseph looked away. That's because Joseph Bennett died in 1974. Cold silence. Then he removed his wallet slowly and handed Greg an ID. The name read, Thomas Bennett. You had a brother? Greg asked. Joseph nodded weakly. Twin brother. Eleanor stared at him in shock. Thomas looked toward the mountains before speaking. We switched places the night of the accident. Back in 1974, Thomas had been the one chased by corrupt deputies after discovering evidence linking local officials to illegal toxic dumping near the mines. Joseph helped him escape. But during the chaos, the wrong body was identified. Everyone believed Joseph died. Thomas realized telling the truth would put Eleanor in danger too. So he vanished, started over in Canada. New name, new life. But one thing haunted him every day. Eleanor waiting for someone who could never come back. Tears rolled down Eleanor's cheeks. You could have written, Thomas's voice broke. I tried. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out dozens of unopened letters, every single one addressed to Eleanor. They intercepted them. Greg stared. Who? Thomas looked toward the cemetery road. The black truck was gone now. But fear still lingered in his eyes. Some people in this town never wanted the truth uncovered. The wind howled across the graves. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then Eleanor stepped closer. Her fragile hand touched his face gently. You idiot, she whispered through tears. I would have waited anyway. Thomas laughed softly. The same crooked smile from the photograph, and suddenly, for one impossible moment, they were 18 again. That evening, the entire town watched from diner windows as Eleanor and Thomas sat together on her porch swing beneath the Montana sunset, talking, laughing, remembering. Two people robbed of half a century, but somehow still finding their way back to each other. 3 weeks later, Eleanor passed away peacefully in her sleep. The town said Thomas disappeared after the funeral. Some claim he drove north into Canada again. Others swear they saw him standing beside Eleanor's grave long after midnight. But the strangest part? When visitors began leaving flowers at her grave, they noticed a second gravestone had appeared beside hers overnight. No one saw who placed it there. No records existed. Only a name carved into stone, Thomas Bennett, 1949 to 2026. And underneath, forever yours, Eleanor.